Hi, my name is Darren. I always say that 21st January was a turning point for the world. This is the time that the world reset. Now, what I'm talking about is that that's the day Donald Trump was sworn in as the 47th president of United States. And why do I say that the world actually reset? Is because when he came into power, we saw so many executive orders being signed every single day. And one of them was ending the United States agency, which we all call USAID. Now, that could have taken some time. It wasn't signed that very day, but after some time, they had to disband the United States agency. And many people lost their jobs. But the idea for them to completely shut down the USAID was that the government was spending a lot of money, especially in so many countries that had famine, that had diseases, had war, and people basically who were in need. We saw this in the Middle East where they spent a lot of money. They spent a lot of money in Africa. Almost every African country was receiving money from USAID. And some of the things that they spent on in say, Africa was one, malaria. They had issues to do with, they spent on situations like HIV, largely actually, say in East Africa, most of the money was going to treatment of HIV patients, but also fighting or messages fighting the spread of HIV. And indeed, they played a very pivotal role to see that HIV ends in 2030, if I get the year very well. If I don't, you'll forgive me for that. So today, a report by the Lancet comes out and shows the damage that the closure of USAID has done. What am I talking about? Let's first look at, first of all, the achievements that the USAID had on African continent. Malaria was fought up to below 51%. HIV's message and prevention had acquired up to, was effective, up to about 78%. There was a fight against things like cholera, refugees, and so on, so forth. A lot. Now, this report of the Lancet says and points out that about 14 million people will die by 2030 because of lack of aid and because of USA shutting down USAID. That is the prediction that they are looking at. And by 2030, they're also saying that about 4.5 million of the people who will die or likely to die are going to be children. That's quite a huge number. The same report will actually tell you that about 700 children die every day in the 133 countries that we put together and did the research about the impact of the closure of USAID. And here we are not talking about the people who actually lost the jobs directly. So what does it say, and where am I going with this conversation? And that's why I'm making a little bit a longer video compared to normal days. It tells us how much Africans, we are not prepared for uncertainties. It tells us about the lack of preparations from government or budget priorities. Where are we spending money the most? Are we spending it in critical areas? I'll give an example. I don't know any African country that spends less on security when it comes to the budget. Usually, when they present the budgets, just look at the financial year 25-26. Look at what are the budget priorities. You will find that security has taken a bigger cake or share of the cake compared to health and education. So it means instead of us spending a lot of money in health to ensure that we continue with the message of we shall end HIV by 2030, we visited reset back. The money that has been going to buying malaria drugs, doing trials and tests, that money has been cut significantly. the money that was being used to treat people like suffering from mpox, or the money that was going to Ebola, all that money has been cut significantly. Why? Because most African budget countries, when they are doing their budgets, there is they will put the actual money they can collect. For example, they'll collect about 54% domestically, and then the rest is calculated in terms of foreign aid. So it means we even budget on the money that has been promised to us. And now when that money is cut, there's a problem. And by the way, why do we spend a lot of money on security, yet we actually don't have significant wars or wars that are actually taking our attention on the continent? Apart from Congo. Maybe if Congo was buying arms and everything, I would say yes. Or maybe Uganda, since they are in a position where they are helping Congo fighting, or the ADFs and things like that, maybe. But why, ask yourself, why a country like Botswana? Why a country like Namibia? Why a country like Malawi? Why a country like Lesotho would spend a lot of money on security? You don't have wars, you don't have insurgencies, you don't have uprisings, or maybe let's say Islamic insurgencies. Yeah, I mentioned that. So if you don't have such threats to your country, why do you spend a lot of money on security? Can't the budget for security overlap the other? Okay, I understand that you might want to spend money on intelligence. Usually intelligence doesn't have a ceiling because you're doing espionage activities, so it might be a little bit expensive. But can we not buy tankers, jets, because we don't need them? That's a fact. Who are you fighting with? Ask yourself, since the government bought the last jets, what have they done? Which war did you fight with the jets? Because even the wars or the security we provide in other countries like Somalia, I know countries that provide security forces to Somalia, that money is funded by the EU and the US itself. So it means let those guys give you the money to buy the equipment, or let them buy the equipment to be used in such circumstances or wars that are happening on the African continent. Ask yourself that question. But it always looks like we buy this equipment to suppress protests. Like we buy these equipments to fight people who it just doesn't make sense. But you know what I'm talking about. Beating people on the streets because they're protesting, because they are anti-government. So you have to put pressure on a water tank that is splashing water on protesters. Very interesting. So I think it is time for African leaders to sit down and do a budget priority to say we need to spend more on health, because that's where we have been affected mostly by USAID, and things like education. And then come up with a system, a proper security system that protects the African continent. Just the same way Europe uses NATO. Yes, every country has its own security forces, but largely they depend on NATO. Can the African NATO come out and protect the other countries that have insurgencies and wars? I think that's how we should think about security. Did you know that there are actually countries that spend even less than 0.1% of their budget on security? Malta, Ireland, they don't spend a lot. By the way, even France doesn't spend a lot on its security. Anyway, I don't know what you think about this, but the report is a very interesting one. And by 2030, 14 million people will die just because on 21st of January, a man became a president, sworn in as a president, and signed executive orders. My name is Darren Bartlett. I'll see you in the next one.